All right, everybody. Here we are for episode 102 of Now Showing with Mike and Wayne. But we have it's a special episode as Wayne unfortunately is traveling, so he can't be with us this week. Our good friend Andy Rohr is going to step in into an episode that I want to call Mike and Andy Get Weird because it's going to get weird.
Yeah.
And
all right, let's get weird.
I'll tell you what, Andy, I watched 8 David Cronenberg movies this week.
Whoa. Okay, so someone is weird.
Yes,
that is. I'm very impressed.
it was
Yeah.
tough because I had to watch them where my wife wasn't watching them because then she'd judge me, and I don't want to be judged. And
I was gonna say, and that's kind of, I think, maybe part of. We referenced it a little bit on episode 100, the roundtable episode about kind of having to do these things separate from our wives.
Yep.
Lest they leave us. Because
exactly, yeah, pretty much.
And 8 of them in a week is that's fully loaded, man. I mean, I'm greatly anticipating to hear the list that you went through.
Well, and they're all rewatches too. I didn't watch.
Yeah.
There's still 5 new ones I have to watch, but I wanted to refresh my memory, and I'm glad I did because I got some really good thoughts and ideas. I'm gonna. If you haven't figured it out yet, we are talking David Cronenberg this episode. It's a whole episode of David Cronenberg. We're going to review Crimes of the Future, his new flick at the end, which I've already talked about a little bit. Wayne, if our new episode just came out as we're doing it right now today, Wayne said, "Hey normies, this one's not for you." So
I love that Wayne watched it. I love that Wayne sat through that.
I love that he took the initiative because he didn't finish it, but he watched The Northman. He started watching The Northman. He watched Everything Everywhere all at once. So he was, following us as we were talking about these movies and stuff. So I think that was a good that he's just paying attention to that. Even though it's not, he knows it's not; those aren't necessarily for him, but he wants to, still take it in.
Kudos to Wayne. Kudos to Wayne. I think before you dive into what you watched, and yes, as soon as we said weird, it's obvious they were talking about David Cronenberg and an unparalleled career, factoring in the duration and how prolific he is. Yeah. But you could choose these 8 films from the last 50 years, and that's one point where very few people make films for that long, particularly at this quality, and particularly with kind of running the gamut of topics and whatnot. So I'm interested he's kind of known, I think we'll hit on this for sure, for the body horror part of his career, which was probably maybe the most successful box office wise. And then there's the awards part of his career too.
Yep.
So
there's so many different areas of his career, which I'm really interested to dive into. I'm just realizing as I go through my head, I did watch one movie from each decade, not on purpose, but that's how it worked out. So I got at least one from each decade in there. Since he's been working since the 70s. So David Cronenberg, if people don't know who he is, I think the easiest thing to bring up is The Fly or Dead Zone. Those are, when he started getting popular in the 80s. But Andy, what I wanted to talk about first, and I'll let you go first. What drew you to him first? How did you know David Cronenberg?
Well, before we went live, I was just trying to recall a doc, and I don't mean to. We couldn't ever figure the name of it out. But David Cronenberg was a talking head in it, and it was about kind of auteurs of the 70s and 80s. And I feel like it was centered around horror in general. And there was the brief clip from Scanners in there. They actually didn't show the clip, but they showed the build up to that. Yeah. And then I recall. So this is probably when I was, I don't know, around 18. And I recall in Wayne's World, there's a joke Garth says.
Yep.
You might recall where they're live on the new when they get the money from Rob Lowe's character and what's the Murray brother. I don't mean to spend too much time on that, but to make the show, to take the show off the normal public access and Wayne basically gets fired, and Garth's got to do the show by himself. And actually, he doesn't say it. It's one of the buddies that films it. He looks at the other guy and goes, "Has anybody ever seen Scanners?" Because Garth's just staring there So long way of saying that the first Cronenberg movie that I saw was Scanners. Now, going back, referencing episode 100, I talked about Night of the Living Dead, kind of gateway for me to watch a lot of weird shit, right? Scanners is one of those things. It's like, this is supposed to be fucking weird. And
Mm-hmm.
so that was like, let's give this a go. Me and a good buddy. And sure enough, it delivered. It's otherwise like a kind of a slow movie, but there's
It is
two
for
like
sure.
two pretty shocking sequences. One where someone like gets set on fire, and then one where a dude's head explodes, like a
Which,
watermelon.
if you haven't seen Scanners, you've seen that scene because they play that. That was a compilation of horror
Yeah,
movies of the '80s, just
yes.
all over the place.
So that was kind of like my intro to him of watching that, and then I kind of started to cycle through some of that body horror stuff. So The Fly, Videodrome, which is one of my favorites of his, and then just a handful of years later, it was kind of like when he was doing History of Violence and Eastern Promises. So this was like a whole other side of him, and I
Mm-hmm.
started to cycle through the catalog. I'm disappointed in myself. One, that I didn't watch 8 movies this week of his, but also that I'm not quite a completist. I was going through the list, just on Wikipedia just prior to
Mm-hmm.
this, and I mentioned earlier how prolific he is, but I've not watched some of these, and
Yeah.
a lot of my disappointment in myself comes from the fact that from just having watched Crimes of the Future, which I know we're both big fans of because we're both
Mm-hmm.
sickos, is that it's so good, and it makes me like reevaluate him as a
Mm-hmm.
filmmaker, makes me want to rewatch things that I already liked because on the surface level, it's just like shocking, right? Whether it's
Mm-hmm.
the sex, I mentioned the gore, the horror, but there's like a big sexual component in a lot of the films that, can certainly be like, I won't like, be a little bit of a draw, you could say a teenage, heterosexual boy, or
Mm-hmm.
somebody even in their 20s and so forth. But there's so much more there. And so now I want to go back and like really do my diligence to watch everything
Yeah.
that he's done. So
Well, and if I think we could do one thing with this podcast is get just a couple people to go through and start becoming fans of his. I think we've done our job
yeah,
because
we'll hand out buttons or something, or send
yeah,
you like, I'm a sicko. I'm a sicko too.
I
Um,
survived Cronenberg. Um,
yeah,
so for me, I think growing up, Andy, and maybe you're a little different. Like I know I had seen The Fly like as a child, like just on TV and stuff, but I didn't put together that this was this person. And then so my first introduction to one of his movies that I remember wholeheartedly, and this is going to probably freak out a lot of people, is Crash, because Crash was when it came out in the 90s, the late 90s, when I was coming of age. And
yeah.
I've talked about this before. My dad had the black box, so we got all the movies and stuff. We had Cinemax, HBO, everything. I would just sit my summers and weekends and stuff, dude, watching movies all the time. Crash was just one of those movies. And if you're not, it's not the Crash from 2003. It's Crash from 1996 with James Spader and Elias Koteas, Deborah Kara Unger. It's a movie about car crashes and sex. And
Oh
so that
yeah.
was my first introduction into him.
Wow.
But
So
not,
question for you. Question for you. Have you
uh,
seen that subsequently, or did you only see it back when you had the black box?
it's one of the ones I just watched. So,
Okay,
because
I did. I actually just watched it for the first time this week.
yes, then
So
that's why I wanted to watch it again because I knew I
your
wanted to
point on
definitely
car
talk.
crashes and sex, every scene is basically back wall to wall that, particularly
Yep,
in the last like 40 minutes.
pretty
Um,
much. It's there. I mean, there's definitely a lot of subtext in the film. We'll get to Crash, but then when I became aware of him was, and you mentioned Videodrome, which I also got to revisit again this week. I was working at Camelot Music and they had videos, VHS tapes. That's when I started becoming an avid movie collector. And I saw this cover box, and I'm like, "What the fuck is this?" It's like it's James Woods, and he's like disappearing like digital TV and shit. And I'm like, "What is this fucking movie?" And it was like $10. I'm like, "I'm just gonna buy
oh
it."
yeah, what a
Sight unseen, bought it. I think I saw David Cronenberg. I'm like, "Oh, it's the guy that did Crash." I'm like, "Okay, like I know who this is." Because this was the time where IMDb started like the late 90s. And I was working at Camelot. It was 99. So IMDb I had already invested my brain into that already. or maybe actually 2001. Sorry, is when I started, or 2000 is when I worked at Camelot. Sorry, going through my mind here. So I had already, started recognizing these directors and actors and stuff.
Sure.
So I was like, oh, Cronenberg, man, what a mind fuck that movie is, man. It's there, and there's a thread too from, and I'm going to draw that later. We're doing how we got introed, and then we're going to go back and start talking about his catalog. But I'll draw the thread in a little bit.
It's one that I'm glad you watched so we can really connect on it. But I feel like having seen Crimes of the Future, there's like just a lot of. I mean, I know we're going to hit on it. It's very valuable to have just seen that movie. But
yes,
just one more quick note on Crash. And kudos to you for recognizing Cronenberg back then. I remember when that came out, I didn't pay much mind to directors at that point in my life, but I just remember I think it was probably Michael Wilmington and maybe Gene Siskel too at the time for the Chicago Tribune. Just hated this movie, like 1 star, 0 star, and it was around the same time as Showgirls, and so it just seemed like okay, another NC-17 like ridiculous movie. I had no idea that he was lauded in such a way, and that it was like it got a special award at
Cannes. Yeah, they only give out that award when they want to. So it's like a special. It's been around for a while, but it's an award they don't give out every year, and they're like, because of originality and intrigue, they're like
intrigue. Is that the word they use? Intrigue.
I'm using that. I don't know if that's. I know originality was one of them.
That's awesome. There's a great story, and I wish I'm blanking on it. Well, I'll have to comment it on Instagram or Facebook. Whoever was at the helm of that committee that year to judge, like kind of like bailed on it because he didn't want to like give this movie an award because he was so sickened by it.
And that's, you know what? That's Cronenberg in a nutshell. Like that, you have to like feel this like filth, I guess. But it's some of us just we like it. We like to live in it while we watch these movies. Not afterwards, Sometimes you need a bath when you're done with one. But they're just that's how they are. They're very squishy, and that means lots of blood.
Squishy is a perfect word for
it. All right, so we how we got into it, we got there. We're going to jump back now to the 1970s. He did a bunch of short films. He actually did one called Crimes of the Future. I believe I was just reading, you could get all his short films. They're either online, some are on the Brood Criterion, but also the British version of Videodrome has a disc that actually has all his old, I don't own it, but it has all his like original short films and shit like that on it. So,
that's really interesting to know. I actually have some of them because I was telling you like when I got into them and when I was like, and you'll respect this story. I was searching I wanted to see Shivers really bad because that was his first film, and I couldn't find it without getting the German DVD and like buying the German DVD on eBay. So I had to get like a region-free DVD player to watch this also. So I've watched it, and there's also like some of the extras or some of his student films and whatever. Like, but I love that. You talked about Camelot music and getting Videodrome, and so much of like the enjoyment of that is like, I bought this, I had this thing, and now I have this commitment to it. It's not fly by night. Oh, it's streaming. I can take it or leave it.
Yeah.
I've invested in this.
It was, that was an exciting time for me just because that, like I said, that's when I started collecting. So, one of my favorites is Army of Darkness. I bought that. I bought Videodrome. I bought a bunch of these horror films from that store. But so 1975, as you mentioned, Shivers that's when Shivers comes out. Now, I only just saw this movie last year. I did watch it this week, so that was one of my rewatches. Mainly because it's like 70 minutes long. I'm like, well, I can do this one real quick. Shivers, a movie about
well, what is it really about? Right? Like, it's one of those.
Well, that's just it. Like, his movies cover, it's addiction, it's consumerism, it's capitalism, it's all this stuff. But on the surface, it's a movie about like a virus that makes people, or like a slug, I guess in this case. Around the time I watched Shivers, I also watched a movie called Slugs. I was in my slug zone there. he talked about sex, like that's what he uses to drive his kind of a lot of his stories, especially back in these first two movies that he did with Shivers and then Rabbit in 1977. Also a rewatch this week. That's another crazy movie.
Yes.
Uh,
Yes.
so Shivers, what I like about Shivers is it's very self-contained in the story, so it's easy to get into. There isn't much explanation, so don't. It's one of those things like when you watch a Cronenberg film, do not go in expecting for them. Well, this is how the virus started, and this is how we're going to beat it. That's not what it's about. It it's take Walking Dead for example. You know, it's a zombie show, not about zombies. It's about the people, and that's what his early movies are about. How we as people react in these situations, and how when our inhibitions are thrown away, this is who we are, and we're and literally eating each other uh, in this film. So I mean, it's a crazy fucking movie. I've now seen it twice within the last year.
I
I
love
do own it.
So there's a nice connective thread here to talk about Shivers, and it's coming on the heels. I think there's certainly similar themes in Dawn of the Dead, the original George
I was
Romero,
yes, I was
about like the shopping mall and
mhm,
consumerism, and we're all zombies.
yep,
This is kind of about we're trying to escape. In a sense, it's escaping kind of what had happened was going on in. I mean, he's from Canada, but was going on,
yeah,
what we'll say in the U.S. or
mhm,
maybe some elsewhere. Sometimes it's called white flight. Sometimes it's like people leaving the cities and
mhm,
going to the suburbs, and so that on one hand, but also like it takes place in this high rise where the
yep,
idea is kind of like, well, you have everything you need here. You've escaped, and this is the ideal. So like that's the undercurrent of this like slug movie.
yep.
And I'm just doing this kind of research on the fly here, but if you might have seen High Rise with Tom Hiddleston.
I have not seen it yet. No, I want
Okay,
to.
so 2015 movie, kind of about the same thing,
Yeah,
although it's just about that. It's a satire. It's fucking over the top. It
yeah.
takes place. They make it take place in the 70s. Elizabeth Moss, Luke Evans, and Sienna
Mhm.
Miller. But it's based on and this is what I wanted to bring to your attention. Based on a 1975 novel written by J.G. Ballard. Does that name ring a bell from this week from watching?
Holy no fucking way, man! I didn't even
Yeah,
realize until I watched Crash that was like that person is the person. I was like, holy shit.
yeah. So
So
clearly, J.G. Ballard, from a young age, Cronenberg was like, I don't know, maybe I'm manifesting this, but
no,
he,
you're probably onto something. Yeah.
he read that and was like, I'll take a piece of this novel and put it in
Mm.
my horror movie.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you
Yeah, that's
brought up
fantastic.
that's great information, Andy. I'm glad you brought up Romero though, because I totally when I was watching Shivers and Rabid, I'm like, this was him trying to do Night of the Living Dead. Like he was both movies. I think he was trying to do his own version of that, taking a scary topic or just a scary subject matter and throwing the social commentary at it. And with Rabid too, you get very much, it's the new is a theme throughout all the new sex. What's the new thing that's
Yes,
going to get you off, and that um really is like again it's taking this idea and then putting something underneath it. And everyone, we've talked about this before, the original Night of the Living Dead, a lot of the subtext is about racism. And
yes.
so he didn't go that route, he went a different route. He went in like the again the 70s too, the sexual revolution. So like, or that was more the 60s, I guess, but coming off of that, he grew up in that
Well,
time. So
women's liberation was in the earliest part of the 70s.
there
So
you go, yeah,
and
which is
the morning after pill
yep,
and birth control in a bigger way. And obviously that was like the decade that the porn exploded, adult films, that
exactly.
were
And
more
yes,
mainstream. So yes, it's about people like when they're infected, they basically want to have sex like
mhm.
in a rabid manner, to use the
Yes,
word from another
and that's
film.
what Rabbit is. Rabbit is the real sex one, where in Shivers, they're really eating each other a lot, which
Right,
can
right, 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 right.
also be seen as that as well.
Yeah.
I think, it's just interesting after having watched again 8 of his movies this week to see those themes continuously pop up, even in something like Dead Zone, where it's not about sex and that kind of stuff, but it still has a theme in that, you know, that the girl that he always wanted to be with, that kind of, so there's still that kind of under the surface is still sex involved. It's just not direct.
Yeah.
Um,
Yes.
so I like that he was able to do, you know, go to some mainstream stuff and kind of sneak his little Cronenbergness in there. I mean, it's very clever. But with Rabid too, I mean, you brought up porn being a big influence in the 70s. They cast a porn star, Marion Chambers, to be the star of Rabid. So
that's
she was
right. Okay.
yeah,
Wow.
so Marilyn Chambers, I think. So Behind the Green
Yeah.
Door was her big adult film from 1972, I think. And yes, I know that, people. It's fucking film history. It sticks in my head. I'm sorry. That was, and you know, this may, I don't know if you know this. You know who produced Shivers and Rabid? Do you know?
I don't know.
Big Canadian filmmaker, just passed away recently. Ivan Reitman.
No way. Wow.
Yes. Ivan Reitman, it was his idea to cast Marilyn Chambers. He wanted Cronenberg wanted Sissy Spacek, and but Carrie, when they were casting for Rabid, Carrie had not come out yet, so they weren't sure. And then it came out while they were making it, and of course she blew up then. And then it was like, well, but the reason they won't, and they
movie, I mean, entirely. I mean, you know, Sissy Spacek is kind of rail thin.
Yeah,
you know, childlike.
Mm-hmm.
Not
yes.
Marilyn Chambers.
Not Marilyn Chambers.
Marilyn Chambers is my second favorite porn star from the 70s, behind Amber Waves.
Yes.
Boogie Nights reference, everybody.
Yeah,
okay.
Boogie Nights, everybody.
Yeah.
Big, bright, and shining star. Yeah, so I thought it was interesting, and the reason, because again, you brought up the idea that porn was huge in the 70s. That's the reason Ivan Reitman cast her, because it was recognition. People saw her face, they knew who she was, and she was trying. They'd have been known that she was trying to break into mainstream film. Didn't last very long, but she did that movie. And you know what? Honestly, rewatching it, she's pretty good in it too. It's not you're not like, oh, it's a porn actress doing a performance. She did a pretty good job for the content and, you know, the type of movie, you know, very much a grindhouse film that Rabid is. I do have an interesting story about Rabid too, Andy. So I wasn't even.
I was just gonna say though, like it, you know, part of what made porn mainstream, aside from being new and look, it's sex on screen, actual sex,
right?
Is that it was under, like, it was a movie, like,
right? Exactly.
You know what I mean? Like, right? It had a plot. Yes, there was hardcore sex in it, but like
they had stories.
They were trained actors. I'm not saying they're Academy Award actors, but it was very different than what we imagine now, particularly now. Yes. But even like the, you know, our age, is probably the first things we saw in the 90s or whatever. It's very different from that era as well. Yeah. So it was socially acceptable for, you know, B movies to do that.
Of course. Of course,
and that seemed natural, right? They hung out together, you know, if you know what I mean.
Right, exactly. And yeah, they all knew each other. I think that was part of it too. And the porn theaters were huge back in the 70s, going into until VHS ruined that basically in the 80s, which you'll learn if you watch Boogie Nights. So another Boogie Nights reference. So Rabid was interesting. So I was at Best Buy, which is now back to selling more DVDs again, by the way, just so if you haven't been in a while, because they stopped for a while, and that they only had the bigger ones, but I was in there recently and they had a bunch of like weird
DVD stuff. Revival, or is it 4K? Is it like mostly 4K? It
was a lot of 4K, like but like odd stuff that you would still have to order online usually. So I was I was like older movies and stuff, some of the Screen Factory stuff. But so this was probably 5 or 6 years ago. I was in Best Buy and I'm just looking around, you know, perusing the movies as you do when you go in the movie section. And I fucking came across a DVD copy of Rabid. And I'm like, I pulled it out. I'm like, fucking Cronenberg. I'm like, I never saw this fucking movie. What is this? So like, of course I'm like, all right, well, I guess I'm buying this now. This is like when you talk about, you know, discovering movies that when I worked at Camelot, this was like that same feeling, like, holy shit, I've never even heard of this movie before.
Yeah.
And
was it more than 5 or 6 years ago when you think about it? I'm just thinking because like streaming is changed the way, like, the availability for things.
but
radically different.
I think that's why I thought it was weird though, because streaming was pretty prevalent when I
It still
purchased
was
it.
there.
I
Okay,
thought it was
okay.
strange that there was a DVD copy of this movie, and even when I looked it up, like the most recent release of that was a Blu-ray from Scream Factory. So it wasn't a Scream Factory. It was like just a
It's so
DVD
random.
version, like that someone must have just put out. Because other thing with a lot of those movies from back in the '70s is they went through so many different distributors that so many different people have released DVDs. Like Night of the Living Dead has a special anniversary edition from like 9 different companies. So I have a couple of
That's
them.
awesome. That's awesome. Well, it was destined to be then. It was this
It was,
random,
it
random
was, it was,
DVD.
it was just one of those weird moments that I was just like, holy shit. And I do have to thank you too for telling me to watch Shivers, because I think it's immediately when you told me that, like I went and purchased it it was on sale, I think on Vudu, and I'm like, well, fuck it,
Love
it's like
it. Love
$5.
it.
I'm gonna
Love
buy it.
it. Yeah.
All right, so I haven't seen Fast Company yet. That's one of the ones I need to see still. That's like a comedy action flick that he did in 1979.
Me neither. Yeah.
Yeah, it's on. If anyone's interested, I think it's on like Vudu or Tubi or something like that for free, just with commercials. As are Shivers and Rabid, by the way, both on Tubi right now. So I think where he really starts to hit is his first couple his last of the '70s, and then his first couple of the '80s, and that is The Brood, Videodrome, which we talked about already a little bit, or Scanners, Videodrome, and then The Dead Zone. So his first like 4. But we'll leave The Dead Zone for a minute, because that was where he kind of went mainstream. So Brood, Andy, what's your first experience with The Brood?
So yeah, and I have seen The Brood. Now I will tell you in advance. I've actually not. This is going to blow you away. I've actually not seen The Dead Zone, which
Really? Holy
you've
shit!
noted how commercially successful it is. That's one of the weird ones I haven't seen on this list. I haven't seen Naked Lunch also.
Me too, and I own that one, and I haven't watched it yet. But
Yeah.
I was like,
So
I'm gonna put
yeah,
it on this, but I couldn't, because I'm like, I don't know how weird it is. We're gonna wait till I have some alone time. But
yeah, but I have seen the Brood. It's like, it, I mean, there's some like lasting imagery in that for sure. I mean,
yeah,
what's
the
the
end,
actress?
for sure is
Samantha Egger.
insane.
Yeah, with like these like creatures, right?
Yep.
I'm trying to recall. Like I've seen this just once.
Okay,
Um,
I just saw it
but I'm
recently. So I remember it a little bit more. I'm
okay.
guessing.
Yeah, help me through it, because I know, like,
So
interesting. I'm seeing film
just
score by Howard Shore, by the way, first
he
composer.
scored most of Cronenberg's films, yeah, except
Outside You
for
Crash. Yeah.
I
Okay.
think except for Dead Zone. I think
Yeah.
you and Howard Shore have Dead Zone in common. You guys have both.
But this is about like murders going. Okay. Yeah.
So
Sorry.
there's
You
murders
take it here.
happening, and there's a suspect. You know, it's a mystery throughout. The one thing that we need to talk about, you know, we mentioned body horror. People may not know what that is. That is basically Cronenberg. And if you ask him, he's never made a horror film, because in his mind, it's more science fiction than
Mm.
horror, because he takes things that attack the body, or more, not that they could happen, you know, necessarily, but like birth defects, stuff like that's what The Brood is. Like he takes things that are scientifically may seem possible, whereas he doesn't, you know, do it to, like, he's not creating monsters necessarily. It's The Brood is like somebody where things are like growing out of them. Like it's a weird, just again, like we said, squishy, sticky.
Squishy. Yeah. I'm trying to think of a modern film that owes a debt. Like I think Malignant,
Malignant,
probably.
Slither, definitely, with like
Yes.
Shiver
Oh
and
yeah.
Brood. I think definitely owes a little bit to that. Obviously, James Gunn, I think you could say, saw those movies probably growing
Yeah.
up.
I think, but along with body horror, he's very interested in like what you'd perceive as like skeletal.
Yeah.
So like what the
Mhm.
insides of a human would look like,
And
um,
that's, yes, exactly. And
and whether it's you know, beautiful, or whether it's distorted or ugly.
mhm,
And any chance he gets, he'll kind of feature a body part in an unusual manner, I think. And that's part of the body horror.
yeah,
That's like our perception. Is it horror? Is it you know, science
right,
fiction? Right.
exactly.
Um, but there's such a continual theme in film to film. Like we earlier, I said like, oh, he does very different types of movies, but at the same time, like he also doesn't hold back when it's like there's extreme violence, and
Nope.
this is the effects of that violence.
Yeah,
It's like
like something like A History of Violence, where
history of violence.
it's not a body horror film, but when there's violence, it's like you're watching one of his old body horror films.
And like Ed, the demise of Ed Harris is
Ed
coming up.
Harris, the guy that looks like Lance Henriksen, Stephen McCady, I believe is his name. Um, like how he gets a coffee pot to the face, and his
That's
jaw is
right.
shredded and stuff. So
Yeah.
he kept, like you said, like even when doing like a different movie, he would keep some sort of theme. Dangerous Method is a movie about Freud, which is funny because all his movies are about sex. So finally he did a movie about Freud. Not one of my favorites, but still he
No,
made it.
honestly, a Dangerous Method kind of cooled me on him. I know we're not talking about Dangerous Method, but that kind of cooled me on him
Same.
until this latest film brought me back. So,
like two of the other ones I haven't watched are Cosmopolis and Map of the Stars, because,
same.
like you said, I watched Dangerous Method and I was like, oh, yeah.
Yeah, I like the leads in it.
Yep.
I just expected more from
Yeah.
a Cronenberg film. It felt like it could have been anybody.
And now I forget which, because I watched 8 of them. I forget which movie it is, but one of the movies has a Freud book in it. And I'm like, when I saw that, I was like, oh, well, this is how we got there. Like this is where we get to where he made Dangerous Method and why he made Dangerous Method. Obviously, he's a Freud freak. So,
take us. I would take us back to your list though, before we go on this detour.
So you want me to give the whole list?
Yeah. So after you saw The Brood,
okay.
And how did that hold up on second viewing? Because that's something I've not seen.
I only saw once. I saw Brood. That one was
but
I saw it recently though, like probably less than a year ago. So
okay, so it's not okay. I got you. Not a rewatch. Is still pretty fresh.
All right. So here's the list: Shivers and Rabid, but watch both of those. And then I watched Videodrome. Mm-hmm. The Dead Zone was the first one I watched because that one's more palatable. I was able to watch it with the wife. Let's see. Here I have the list. Let me just pull up the list real quick on my Letterboxd.
Well, next up for him is The Fly. Did you rewatch The Fly or no?
I did. I was going to, but I kind of had seen that one enough where I'm like, I could talk my way through The Fly without having to rewatch it. But I did watch A History of Violence, which is one of my favorites of just like a movie out of in a whatever that decade when it came out. Let's see here. So Dead Zone, Shivers,
97, by the way, 97 graphic novel by John Wagner and Vince Locke.
For which, for A History of Violence. Yeah. Existence, A History of Violence, Videodrome, Crash, and then Crimes of the Future. So those were the 8 that I watched.
I think what's fascinating, I don't know if you thought about this at all when you're going through these, but we're obviously talking about him as a director primarily, but he's also written a lot of these, particularly a lot of the earlier films.
He wrote a lot of them. He's also an actor too, like a real actor, not like hey, there's the Stephen King cameo or there's a Spielberg in his own movie or M. Night Shyamalan. Like he gets cast in other people's films. It's like Kismet this week. I come home. I take a shower, I get out of the shower, I go sit down. My wife is watching The Disappearance at Clifton Hill, co-starring David fucking Cronenberg. I'm like, babe, really? I'm like, this is the guy that we're talking about this weekend. And she's like, oh, I had no idea.
That's awesome. I remember him in Jason X.
Yep. I was going to start off and say we're going to talk about David Cronenberg's acting career.
And then I remember him in Nightbreed. Have you seen Nightbreed? Clive Barker. Nightbreed.
One that I'm going to rewatch soon because Joe Bob did it this season, so I haven't gotten to it yet. But I'll get to that one. I like that.
One quick note on his acting too. I didn't realize this, and I've failed as a Trekkie. I don't know if I'm really a Trekkie, but he's in Star Trek Discovery as a recurring role. I didn't even realize this.
Yep, I noticed that too. And then he was on the most recent season of Slasher as well, which is a Canadian horror series, like an anthology series. He was one of the main characters, I think, in that. So he not only directs, writes, like you said, produces obviously a lot of stuff. He produced his son's movie. His daughter's got a movie coming out as well within the next year or two. So and his sister was his costume designer basically up until she passed away. So the film business is in the Cronenberg blood. So, but as we talk about, you get Brood, Scanners, and Videodrome. So those are three definite body horror, three indie kind of like
Yeah.
they're teetering on the grindhouse era, making its way into the Hollywood era, I think, which
Yeah,
is
I mean,
what.
Videodrome is probably the tipping point there.
Yes,
Just
I would
at the
agree with that.
same time, it's not quite there. Like that's it. That's I know that you and I like might we don't want to talk about James Woods today, but like James Woods in the early '80s. I mean, I don't know if you've seen Salvador, Oliver Stone film. Like
I haven't seen that one, but I've seen a bunch of
very
his
good,
older
very good.
80s
But like
stuff.
James Woods in the early '80s was just kind of just coming into his own as an actor. He's great in it. It also stars Debbie Harry in
Yep.
a real like bonkers performance, given that like she was big pop star from Blondie, right?
Right. And so what's interesting too, and I read this on one of the I've got a IMDb trivia thing I'm going to go through later, but
Okay.
he what was interesting, I think, is that Shivers was really the only movie that he didn't cast a known person in, and then every movie after that, including Marilyn Chambers because she was famous,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
then you get to Oliver Reed in The Brood, you get to you had Michael Ironside, and there was,
Yeah.
I think, somebody else in Scanners. You get James Woods, Christopher Walken, Jeff Goldblum, so these people, Gina Davis, these people that are starting to become recognizable or stars in their own right.
Peter
In
Weller.
Peter, well, yeah, exactly. In these weird, you know, kind of Hollywood style movies that look really great. The scores
Yeah.
are amazing from Howard Shore mostly. The cinematography is fantastic, but they still have this griminess to them up through Videodrome. And the
Yeah.
so what the through line I want to draw through three separate movies starts with Videodrome, and that's the design of the devices. Like you sent me a text today, Crimes of the Future. Oh, how about those devices?
Yeah.
Well, in Videodrome, when he's
Yeah.
got the gun in his hand, it's like a bone surrounding his hand, and it's like a part of him, so it's become
Yeah.
attached to him. And there's two other movies, one of which is the newer one, but there's another one that I don't know if you know that we'll talk about as well. That deals with a lot of that. So it's almost like he's been trying to make that movie since
Yes.
1983, and he keeps going back to having like the future is going to be weird
Yeah.
looking bone devices.
Yeah. He revisits that. I mean, yeah, Crimes of the Future has a lot of that, and I think that's what one interesting thing. I know we're talking about that later, but as a viewer, Crimes of the Future it almost kicks off where the expectation is that you've seen other David Cronenberg films.
It does. It really
Right?
does. You have
You're
to.
not going to be weirded out by any of this or question it. He's not going to bother explaining it. He's just anticipating that if you're a sicko, I'll just keep using that, enough to see my film, you've probably seen other movies of mine. At this point, he's 79 years old, so like,
Yeah,
if you're going to the theater to see this over, the latest popcorn thing, Existence has got a lot of that too.
that's
That
okay. That
that
was my other line. Yeah, because I just rewatched that
yeah,
one
and
too.
then Videodrome. Yeah, I mean, so much of it just an underlying theme through all of this, and we've kind of like danced around it, but
Yeah.
it's like the human condition and how we evolve,
Yep.
and how we evolve with in the case of Videodrome with television, our relationship with television,
You're right.
how that has changed.
Evolution is huge in his
Yeah.
films, and it's
And he takes it on in like a biological way. Our
yes.
our need for violence, and like how does that change us, in many of these films it's how does that change us physically or internally.
Mm-hmm.
Crimes of the Future teaser a little bit, like how do these things, in terms of Crash, how does our relationship with sitting in a car all day change our relationship with cars, which maybe for some people falls flat, but again, it's like this long thread of a theme in a lot of his movies is like the human condition and how does it change over time as technology has rapidly accelerated. I mean, there's not really a period of time that I can think of. Maybe a historian will fact check me, but like the last 50 years, in
Yeah.
terms of all these evolutions that have happened so quickly.
Yep.
I just watched The Worst Person in the World, not to get way off track.
Yeah. No. Yeah.
Very,
Good movie.
very good movie. But the
Yeah.
guy, one of the characters in it, not the lead, but he's mid 40s, and he talks about how the world is unrecognizable for him. and this is somebody in their mid 40s, someone that's still fairly young, and like how this accelerated culture, has changed how people are. And you talk about it all the time with how social media or phones
Of
changes
course,
people.
of course.
And like, I feel like maybe that's not interesting enough because it's obvious to Cronenberg, but it seems like that would be like something to tackle in that vein too. But it's just
Yeah, I
it's
mean,
very fast. Yeah, go ahead.
he's always going to take it a step further, I think, and like his
Yes. Oh yeah.
the
Yeah.
way his mind works is just it's just so incredible to me to like the stuff that he's able to come up with just in video to go back to 83 and Videodrome, the stuff they were able to do too, all those practical effects and the videotapes morphing and stuff and
Yeah.
just
Oh yeah.
how
It's like a
everything was
live.
just
Yeah.
everything was again squishy liquid, raw, like all this weird just back and
Well, that
forth.
was an era too. And I know we want to probably want to get moving a little bit out of the '80s here, but
Yeah, we'll get moving
one of
along.
the one of the interesting things about Videodrome, like the era that came out with, that was kind of like right around like the launch of cable television.
Yeah.
And but previous to launch of cable television, and um, you have like your main channels, right? Your ABC, your CBS, your NBC. Maybe we'll go as far as Fox, and for us like WPWR channel 50, or
Yeah.
PBS. But you had all these other channels that don't, UHF, the Weird Al movies kind of
Yeah.
about it. These channels that would exist outside of that locally, you could have like a little independent
Yep.
TV network and it could survive. So Videodrome, if I recall correctly, it's kind of about these like snuff film channels that exist.
Yes. So it's
That
basically
yeah,
like look at reality TV. It's we want more. We want to see these people fall. And
mhm,
so with Videodrome, the idea is that we're at a point in time in the future where people want to see people sexually abused, not I won't say sexually, but like S&M on TV. And it's like
yeah.
real like snuff film type shit. And
How
it's
far
about
can
the
you take it? Yeah,
degradation of society and how we are evolving. It's funny how if you watch it, it's obviously we haven't gotten to the extent that he takes it
yeah,
to, but we've seen that we've seen things go that route. And what I think is interesting too is VHS was very new back in 1983. The fact that he
yeah.
had this idea of where this thing was going to go,
Good thing it
and
wasn't Betamax. He really
yeah,
kept
right,
it a
right,
little
yeah,
bit.
yeah. Well, they had to wait to decide who won the battle, probably.
Yeah,
Then they had to use VHS in the movie. Um, but yeah, I mean, it's about the news people trying to get the ratings. It's all about ratings, 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 which is what we had that time in the mid 2000s where they canceled all the scripted TV and everything was a fucking reality show. I mean
yeah,
that was kind of what he was hinting at and where we were going. And throughout his movies, I mean, like you said, he kind of taps into what is going to happen next, and it's definitely more in a sci-fi way, but he hasn't really been wrong in a sense.
yeah,
Like he's
yeah,
been able to read the tea leaves, if you will. And maybe it's just how societies are. And like what you said too is, people like our age are like, oh man, there's like things are changing way too fast. It's like I've always been to like the kind of adapt or die type personality. And I think that's a quote from a movie too. Um, you just have to I've always been like, oh, okay, this is something new. I'm going to learn how to do this. But I know, and we know a lot of people, someone that we worked with, many at
yeah,
Felt, never wanted the new thing. And then if he ever learned the new thing, all the old stuff was shit and he didn't want to do it anymore.
yeah.
So it's like you have
Yeah,
to,
yeah. Well, it makes it probably. I mean, some of that is it makes people feel disposable, right?
yes, for
All
sure.
these skills
For
that have evolved. I mean, I think I personally, I'm sure this will resonate with you. I'm a pretty good treasure trove of like trivia and knowledge about sports movies,
Yeah.
whatever.
Mhm.
And it's like not as valuable as it once was because everybody got a smartphone.
Right. Of course.
You
Of course.
know,
I
and
was
I
I was
mean,
the
yeah,
guy, man. My
yeah, oh
buddy would
yeah,
come at the bar. He'd be like, "Oh, let's call Michael. He'll know the answer." And he'd call me up. He'd be like, "Hey, who was this guy in this movie in 1995?" And I'm like, "Oh, that was Ted. That was Keanu Reeves playing blah blah blah." And he's like, "All right,
yeah,
thanks, man. Told you he'd know it." And then he'd hang up the phone.
yeah,
But now
yeah.
you're right. Everybody
Yeah,
knows. So
there's this less value on that, and that's just one example of kind of like
yeah.
this evolution. But
All right.
yeah, I
So
mean, yeah, go ahead.
no, so I was just gonna say because you said like we spent a lot of time back in the 70s and 80s, so like, we'll get moving along because I know people are like, "What?" This is like we've talked like 5 movies. So right after Videodrome, we talked about already. This is where he took off. This is where he goes through a period of time where he's making big budget movies. He does The Dead Zone, Christopher Walken, based on a Stephen King novel, very well received. Didn't like blow up the box office or anything, but if you take Rotten Tomatoes at all, it's 90% on Rotten Tomatoes, so high ratings. Good movie, kind of a slow burn, told in two parts. Walken's really good. They kind of do this thing where he's like chasing a serial killer, then it becomes a political thriller in the last half of the movie. So it's very interesting. Martin Sheen plays a great baddie in it, great political bad guy. It's about a telepath. A guy gets in a car accident. He's in a coma for 5 years. He wakes up and he can see the future basically, and so he then uses that to hunt down the serial killer with Tom Skerritt's character, who's the sheriff, and then again to stop this political guy who's basically going to be the next Adolf Hitler. So there's actually a great line in it where he asks the guy, he goes, "If you could stop Adolf Hitler, you'd go back and do it, wouldn't you?" And he's like, sorry, terrible Christopher Walken impression, but um,
I thought it was a Tom Skerritt impression. I don't know.
No, that was supposed to be Walken. Sorry, he's
No,
talking to the doctor. But again though, one of the themes, I'm sure why he was attracted to do this adaptation from Stephen King was, again, it's something that's physical that happens to him. He gets in this car crash and all of a sudden he can see the future. So it fits into David Cronenberg's own body horror image, body takeover type of thing that he's interested in.
I'm curious on Cronenberg's involvement. Like, let's see.
Like if he wrote it or not?
Well, I know. I mean, it's a King thing, but I'm curious on like who and like was Cronenberg selected based on his previous like how I'm curious to know like how did that kind of fall into his lap?
Yeah, I wonder if King loved Videodrome because I could really.
Yeah,
but they did.
Interesting note here on Wiki. Bill Murray originally considered for the role that Christopher Walken played. That was
his first. That would have been interesting. Yeah, definitely a movie I recommend. It's definitely if some of the stuff we've talked about weirds you out, start with The Dead Zone, because The Dead Zone or his next big budget one, The Fly, those are very much commercial hits that you could get into. They're very slick looking. They're very Hollywood. Now, The Fly is gross. It is body horror, but it's Hollywood body horror.
I will point out too, part of what makes these. I mean, we talk about themes a ton, but what's made a lot of these stand the test of time, even going back, even though it's not quite as good in Shivers or Rabid, but that we're talking about pretty like we're talking about practical effects, and then particularly with something like The Fly, they're done very well.
Yes.
Like The Fly is like very emblematic of like what makes a lot of 80s horror or 80s sci-fi stand up to this day, is that there's so much quality practical special effects. I'm sure maybe somebody under the age of 15 thinks it looks cheesy, but that helps it stand the test of time. I mean, the Jeff Goldblum, Gina Davis dynamic is fantastic in that.
Of course, yeah. I mean, Earth Girls Are Easy, The Fly, the two of the greatest films of all time.
That's right. I forgot Jeff Goldblum's in that, right?
Yep, I think he might even be in The Accidental Tourist too. I don't remember.
Oh my god! Wow.
But they had a thing going. They were good together. So The Fly again, it's very much more commercial. Dead Ringers is another one that's very much Jeremy Irons in a dual role. So you have a heavy actor, giving great performances. And again, another kind of weird, bizarre movie, but it was definitely more of a commercial, successful film. A good one. I didn't get to rewatch that one this week. I had it downloaded, ready to go, but it was like 2 hours. All the rest of them were under that, so I went to the shorter ones first. But
that's one that I probably have to revisit. I watched it around the time that I was getting into Cronenberg, but I was again flocking towards the body horror stuff, and this is really not that type of movie.
No. Dead Ringers is more of like a thriller, like a edgy drama thriller. Basically about two gynecologists, twin brothers, who are like, one of them's kind of psycho, and that just kind of like slowly unravels throughout the film. A good movie. It's a good movie. It's just a little different than what we're kind of talking about today. We'll skip over Naked Lunch. I didn't see M Butterfly. That's one of the other ones I have to see. Another Jeremy Irons one, and obviously a totally different, think Wes Craven's Music from the Heart. You know, that's like him like, I'm gonna go try
Yeah.
something different. And I don't know. I think it's highly rated. It's just,
Not well. Rotten Tomatoes got it at 43%.
okay, so it's
So
not highly
maybe
rated.
not.
Well, and here you go. And Butterfly is the last movie he did before he did Crash, and that's where he kind of again Crash. He retreated back into his own little brain of weird body image stuff.
Yeah.
Okay, so Crash. We talked about Crash a little bit at the beginning. Crash is a movie about sex and car crashes. That's as simple as I can say it. As Andy said, almost every scene seems to have some sort of sex/car crash in it. It opens on two separate sex scenes between a husband and a wife in separate situations, having sex, and so it's very much earns the NC-17 rating that it got back in the 90s. There's lots of eroticism, sex.
The sheer amount of sex, is it probably got it.
Holly Hunter, Roseanne Arquette, these are big actresses too. Like this is a movie that he cast a lot of known actors in. You get James Spader, Elias Koteas, Deborah Kerr Unger this was kind of like her starting to be noticed a little bit more.
Yeah.
But Holly Hunter,
she's great in it. Yeah. Well, we should talk about it. Yeah, since we both just watched this, but yeah, Holly Hunter. For me, I was surprised her role wasn't bigger. Coming off of the piano and things. It's kind of a more limited role. Yeah, go ahead.
So there was because she's second billed too. So there was I had two realizations in this film rewatching it. One was I'm like, oh yeah, Holly Hunter's in this movie. I totally forgot about that. Even though like you see her name in the beginning, like she doesn't come in.
Oh yeah.
For like maybe like 20 minutes into the movie, 30 minutes, something like that, and then or you see her and then you don't see her again for a little bit. But then, like you said, she's not in it a lot. Like the last like 40 minutes, I'm like, oh wait a minute, I'm like, how I haven't seen like because she comes on scene on screen at the end. And I'm like, oh yeah, we haven't seen Holly Hunter in like 45 minutes.
Yeah.
What happened? So I don't know if it was a scheduling thing or if it was just.
It's strange. Yeah, it's strange. And, I'm sure it was strange then, but watching it now, and I'm sure for a lot, if you watching this after seeing Spader and Stargate, it's quite a departure.
Or watch if you went back and watch it after watching his Red Reading and the Blacklist or something.
Yeah. But he was, at the same time, Sex Lies and Videotape. I recognize it.
Sex Lies, Videotape. Just a bunch of of these like erotic thrillers and teen movies he did too that were a lot dealt with sex and stuff. He was. People may not know this, but James Spader in the 80s and 90s was like a sex symbol kind of ish actor, and that was why he would get these type of roles. So I think for Cronenberg to land Spader, that was big, and this is. What's interesting about Crash too, it's a movie where you don't really see a lot of repeats. A lot of his movies, he falls in love with an actor, so he'll cast them a bunch, or you'll see little actors here and there, or Viggo Mortensen just made his 4th movie with him.
Yeah.
You haven't seen any, like these people in Crash, they never re-teamed with him. I don't know
that's fat. I didn't think about that. I think Deborah Kerr Unger, for me, after seeing this, and previous to, I was only familiar with her from, I love The Game, and then she's also in Payback.
Yep.
And I get, now looking at her, I recognize a few of these other films, but she's fantastic in this like totally like detached role. Like, I mean, she's in half the sex scenes, to be clear, but like what's amazing to me is like how it's very explicit visually, but then like the dialogue is so clinical.
Yeah.
Do you know the scene I'm talking about in particular?
Yeah.
Like, how many, his penis. Like she'll use these words that no one would really use in when they're having sex. To be quite honest with you.
Yes, exactly.
Exactly. It's a fascinating choice. Yeah, fascinating choice.
It was very interesting. I wonder if a lot of that goes to his. Clinical dialogue he used in a lot of his other movies, because a lot of his movies involve medical procedures and whatnot. If he wanted to if he thought it would be funny, maybe because there are scenes in Crash that are supposed to be somewhat humorous. Yeah. But I think this movie works. It's not great, but
no,
it works because the actors bought in. No one's hamming it up, I don't think. everyone, even Holly Hunter in her limited role, she gives a good performance. Elias Koteas is really chewing up some scenery and doing a pretty good job of it.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Sorry, you're gonna say that?
No, I think you're spot on. Like, yeah, I wouldn't bestow like a great tag on this, but
No,
just knowing how poorly it was received in the
no.
U.S., like, is kind of
It's
my
fucking brutish, fucking bullshit.
yeah.
Oh
It's like,
god,
I mean, it's like it's totally worth seeing. And like,
yeah.
look, if you're still listening to this podcast 54 minutes in, you've already bought in, but like, make sure you set some time to watch this. Like, I know
Yeah.
it's like, hey, whoa, it's an NC-17 movie, and all you've said is car crashes and sex. Like, I don't, am I a sicko? Like, but like, it's truly worth watching. For, you mentioned the performances.
Well,
Do you pronounce it Codius? Is that how you say it? Elias
I say
Codius?
Koteas. I don't. I've never
Codius?
heard it
Yeah.
said. I guess
Yeah, he's
honestly.
like, he's in another world too in this
Yeah.
film. Like,
Everybody
as almost like a cult leader. It's like really
it's
weird role.
super.
Roseanne, yeah, Roseanne Arquette, very limited role, but like, it's a very like, and she's a beautiful woman, but she's like on crutches and she's got these leg braces. It's like
That
very fascinating, and like, he's playing around with the audience in this, like,
yes,
right? Like, this is somebody that's very, very, attractive,
yes.
and I'm gonna put her in this unattractive thing, like, challenge yourself not to get turned on, like, in a sense,
Keep
right? And
keep
we're
in mind,
yeah,
Andy, you
go
watched
ahead.
this recently. I watched this when I was like 14 years old. So I was like, a lot of this stuff in this movie has lived rent free in my brain for over
Yeah,
20 years because
yeah.
it's just
Okay, so
you
it's that's your
you haven't seen. I'm telling you, you haven't seen anything like this movie since or before. Like it's again, like I said,
yeah,
while it's not a great movie because I think there is like a it's about people's inhibitions and how it's going. Basically, we're going to keep pushing further and further to feel sexual what's the right word, pleasure.
drive,
Like we're going to
yeah,
keep looking for whatever the next thing is. That's what this movie is about. But
yeah,
this, like, the plot is like he's this big movie producer who we see produce like a film because
yeah,
it's almost like they forget that he was a movie producer until later in
yeah.
the movie. Um,
Yeah, there's a certain Hitchcock element to it too. I know
yeah,
maybe people like Hitchcock,
for
like,
sure. But
how dare you? But
it's a
um,
movie. I think that, like you said, people need to. If you've made it this long, you need to go see this movie. Maybe find a dark room where you're watching it by
yeah.
yourself. If you're with somebody who
Oh,
enjoys,
I tell you, I watched it in my basement, and I kept thinking, because I got one window that someone could walk by, and I was
yeah,
like, man, if somebody's walking by right now, they're like, what the fuck is going on in here? Like, but there's also like so along with like the sex and cars element, which is, there's also this mysticism around death and like how death and legend kind of connects with
dude.
arousal, and
I
like,
forgot
it's
about.
really
Like,
fascinating,
I
the
think because
idea.
I was so young when I watched it, I didn't understand the last scene. And
Yeah,
I saw the last scene and I was like, "Oh wait, that's what that fucking means." Like
yeah,
she, spoiler, if you had, she wants death. Like that's what she's
yeah,
chasing. And it's like you just said, like the living on, and like that's something that like Elias's character wants. He's fascinated with James Dean. He's fascinated with these car crashes and these
Jane
legacies of
Mansfield,
these
yeah.
people, and who are famous basically for dying. You know what I mean? Like we don't
Mhm.
talk about Jane Mansfield and her acting. We talk about the fact that she was in a horrific car accident, and maybe that Mariska Hargitay is her daughter. Like those are the two
Yes.
facts that people know.
I
And
actually just watched a James Manfield film this week from the Criterion Collection.
yeah,
Phil can't help it, but so yeah, I did my wiki on Jane. But there's one last note just to throw at everybody who's still listening. Um, Rosanna Arquette. So I should mention she's in these crutches. She's got this scar that is like, it just looks like a vagina. It is just like, I
and
mean,
he
in case you didn't pick up on it, folks, like, here's a shot of this, like,
and it gets licked.
oh yeah,
It
yeah,
there's a lot of
Spanish,
like wounds and
yeah,
stuff that get licked in this movie. This is again, that's another theme throughout his movies.
yeah.
People licking wounds. I remember texting Andy during Crimes of the Future. I'm like, oh, someone licked a wound. Like, here we go.
I also want to say one last, and I know that we're not. This is podcast not about Crash in particular, but that what I found like, uh, gratifying in a sense was like, we talk about how like prescient Cronenberg is about like where technology's going or where
Mhm.
people are evolving, but like that he didn't shy away from putting, and I won't spoil it, but like putting like homosexual sex in the
No,
movie,
yeah, it was
and it helps it keep it current, because
it
like
was
when I say prescient impression, however you want to say it, like he's aware that he thought that like this idea of like sexual fluidity, like these characters don't really define themselves by, oh, I like men, I like women. It's like, I am into this, like, you know, car sex cult,
yeah,
and if you're into that, I'm into you.
right,
You know,
exactly.
and
It doesn't matter.
there's not
Yeah,
like there's not a question of like, you know, at no point, I'll say a little bit. There's not like James Spader's like, oh, why would I like Elias Koteas'
yeah.
character? It's like, of course you would, because you're into this. You know,
He's
so
yep.
yeah,
There's there. Yeah, no, you're right. It's a very much a movie that could be watched today. I think in like hit for a lot of people, and I think it did
yeah,
for me. Like rewatching it, it was a good experience to the extent of like understanding it more. Because again, I watched it probably like 5 or 6 times as a
yeah.
teenager.
Yeah, I
um,
mean, yeah, I'm not making like a joke about it,
yeah,
but yeah, you're looking at it differently at 14. Like, obvious for some reasons, but like you don't have the maturity also to see these underlying kind of themes and what the
yeah,
film's
no,
really
it's
about.
yeah, definitely a film that you should watch it as an adult, for
Yeah,
sure, because you'll understand the themes a lot more. So another one I rewatched was Extends, which again, as we mentioned, that's the thread from Videodrome through Extends to um, Crimes of the Future. So Extends, while I
great
like
cast.
a lot of, huh?
I said great cast.
Great cast. The cast is fantastic.
Yeah,
Jude Law was
yeah,
still kind of finding his way a little bit. The performance is not as strong as some of his other movies. You know what gets me with this movie is the story. Like, because we're following one thing and then it becomes something else at the end. And
yeah,
it's really kind of all over the place. I mean, it makes sense when you get to the end of the movie because there's this big twist at the end, but it's still, it kind of left me feeling hollow a little bit at the end of the film because I was like, well,
oh,
what the
okay,
fuck did I watch all of that for? And I've seen this movie before, but I didn't really remember a lot of it. Now, this is where you talked about you sent me the text about the devices and crimes of the future. This is kind of where that started, where they have like the devices are alive. It's like they're the video game units they're playing on are almost like squishy
yeah,
little beings. So it's where you get like the sci-fi thing, and they make these weird noises. And he's got the cell phone that's like very squishy. It's not a regular looking cell phone. So that's where like this kind of futuristic device thing was happening, and you got the bone gun that shoots the teeth. So like there's so many weird fucking things in this
yeah.
movie.
I think this movie's awesome. This is probably one of my favorites,
Really?
especially
Okay.
if I'm saying like where I depart from conventional wisdom, even among Cronenberg fans.
Mm-hmm.
I love the visuals in it. I love that it's kind of it also feels very kind of, it feels of its time, so like late 90s, but it
Yes.
also has a quality that I think will carry over to if people watch it now. It's got certainly the virtual reality thing, you know, is very 90s and like gaming
Yeah.
in that way.
Well, I mean, I think it has a lot of, like we talked with Videodrome, how it was like things that are still kind of going on, or that he was right
Yeah,
about certain things. A lot of the stuff in Extends is relevant to today. And you even have the radicalization of people, which is obviously a huge thing that we're dealing with in this country right now. So I mean,
yeah,
there's a lot of cultish type stuff in this film. There's obviously a lot of virtual reality video games where it looks real. Obviously, we still haven't hit that moment yet, and it's funny when you go back and watch these movies. You're like, oh, they're supposed to be in a video game, and it's like they look like themselves. Like we haven't gotten
yeah.
there yet. We're getting close, but we haven't gotten to that extent yet.
It reminds it. So I think of two movies when I think all separate from Cronenberg about this. When I think about this movie, I think about The Fifth Element in
Mhm.
some like stylistically, like the way it's like a kind of abnormal adventure movie, and then I also think
Yes.
about Strange Days. Did you remember Strange Days?
Yep. Yep. I
Yeah,
haven't. That's the other one
like
I've
the
been meaning
virtual
to rewatch.
reality component.
Yeah.
Yeah,
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 it definitely it like you said, it fits in with those 90s. It fits in with 90s Jude Law. He went from Gattaca to this. So one sci-fi movie to another. He, you know, he it it's a good movie. Don't get me wrong. It just watching
Yeah.
it, like I said, I kind of felt it just felt a bit off for me after it was
Oh
over.
yeah,
Um,
it's yeah, and yeah, I get that too. I think we didn't mention her, but I don't think we did. Jennifer Jason Leigh,
Jennifer Jason Leigh she's great in it too.
she's
She's
great.
really good.
Willem Dafoe. This movie
He's
also, yeah,
Willem Dafoe is awesome.
yeah, what I recall at the time, because I didn't see this in '99. I probably saw this 10 years after the fact, honestly.
Mhm.
But because I think it came out right around the same time as The Matrix too, if I
Yeah, it was
recall.
like it was that same year. Yeah.
It bombed like hard. It only made
Oh,
$3 million at the box office. So this was kind of like another turning. Keep talking about these turning points for him,
yeah.
but like
Well, it was.
his attempt to get back into kind of like more mainstreamish
Yep.
stuff, like failed miserably.
It did, and
At the box office. Yeah.
it wouldn't get better until '05. So yeah, I know you're not a big fan of Spider, so we'll just mention Spider. I like Spider. I did not
Hey, maybe I might need to do a rewatch because I probably saw this. I saw
well,
this in the early days of Netflix, like
yeah.
mailers.
And Spider
And
is
so it was,
uncomfortable. It's an uncomfortable film, and it deals with incest and stuff like that. So it's very much it's more honestly, and I know we talked about these other movies and they sound dark probably to a lot of people. Spider's probably one of his darkest movies, and it doesn't there isn't a moment where you like feel good or you feel like it's not entertaining per se, but I thought it was a really solid flick, and I haven't watched it in a while, but I really did like it when I saw it when it came out. So Ray Fiennes is in it, good actor obviously. um but then you had mentioned the Academy Award time frame, and it
yeah,
really only lasted 2 movies. It should have been 3, but as we talked about one of them already, that
yeah.
it didn't hit for anybody.
Mark, yeah,
Um, but in 2005, he did A History of Violence. History of Violence, a graphic novel, which I think you mentioned already. Um, and it's this film about a former mobster who's hiding out in a small town and gets on TV for saving the day at his restaurant, and the mobsters see him, and so they come to town. Ed Harris plays like one of the main guys, and the William Hurt, who plays the Viggo Mortensen's mobster brother, was nominated for best supporting actor for like a 5-minute role. That's how good he was in it. But like we talked about this movie, where this fits into Cronenberg, one, like 3 or 4 sex scenes. Just they're just there. One of them very rough. I remember one thing I remember about this movie is Cronenberg said him and his wife had to teach Vigo and Mirabella how to have sex on the stairs because it was very rough. It's a very rough
yeah,
scene. It's a fight to a sex scene basically. Um,
yes,
but violence, history of violence. That's really where this movie like hits. Like it's very ultra violent. That's why it was one of the reasons I really liked it. I love the I wouldn't call them action sequences, but the gun violence scenes that happen in this movie. Everyone's really good in it. Viggo Mortensen gives a fantastic performance. Viggo, eh, eh, he's just really good. As much as I have my issues with like Green Book and shit, like Viggo Mortensen from like
oh yeah,
mid
yeah.
2000s to now, even. I mean, he's so good in Crimes of the
He's
Future.
he's great. Yeah, no, for sure.
He's great in this movie. He carries it into Eastern Promises, and where he was nominated for Best Actor for Eastern Promises, which more mainstream. Basically, it's a mob
I
movie.
think total. Yeah, totally mainstream relative compared to this one. Also,
Yeah,
really, but
yeah.
and
History of
that's
Violence is a bit of a niche movie, just because you have to be okay with kind of a slow burn until it gets to like those scenes of ultra violence.
yeah,
You have to be
and
interested.
that pairs him and Naomi Watts for those who
Yes, for
haven't seen
Eastern,
it.
and Vincent Cassel, who is great. He's
Yeah.
reteaming with Vincent Cassel in his next movie, so I'm excited for that as well.
Oh,
Excited
okay.
that he's announced the next movie. First off,
I mean,
um,
going back to history of violence, like one continuing thread because it is very different, but
mhm,
like that idea of violence and sexuality and where those kind of meet,
yep,
and
no,
what are we watching? Like how similar can these acts look
hmm
in a sense, right?
no, you're right.
And
Yeah, it's very
yeah,
much it's insane when when you watch all these movies and you just kind of break it down. It's like holy shit, like there's fucking all this shit's together. I'm really interested to watch Eastern Promises again. I was gonna watch it. I didn't get time to watch
yeah,
it this week. Because I really wanted to watch
yeah.
obviously.
I probably haven't watched it since it came out either, so I need to revisit.
So his last one, there was not his last one. The last one I saw, I guess, before Crimes of the Future was The Dangerous Method. As we talked about,
Yeah.
it's a movie about Freud and one of Freud's critics, played by as a Fassbender, I think, right? It's Vigo and
Yes,
Fassbender,
yeah.
and
Keira Knightley's in it.
Keira Knightley,
Yeah,
yeah,
I mean,
and it obviously deals a lot with sex. It's Freud, just not as it's boring. Honestly, it was kind of slow. I couldn't get into it. Um, Different, but about sex. Obviously, it's that thread that fits through. Are you still
yeah, I
there?
think it was. Yeah, yeah, oh, yeah. I was just saying. I think it was set up or to be a real award contender.
Mm-hmm.
Vigo did get I'm checking it out now, a Golden Globe nomination, Best Supporting Actor for it. But I think at the time, I recall at the time, like when I remember seeing the trailer, I was like, oh, this is going to be like a Best Picture
Oh
contender.
yeah, and if
So
I
the
remember
fact that,
correctly,
and I think that was like really high expectations for it for sure.
oh
I
yeah,
mean, but at that point, he's coming off of History of Violence at Eastern Promises, so you're like, this guy's just killing it.
yes,
Now he's taking on something that seems like Oscar bait. Like let's
yeah,
unpack Sigmund Freud and Carl Jung is the other guy, or
yes,
Jung is
yeah.
yeah. And you're seeing, okay, we got Fassbender, Mortensen, Knightley. Like this is fresh off for Keira Knightley, an Academy Award nomination for Fassbender, the same, and it just doesn't come together, and it ends up being kind of this weird setback for him. I feel like
Yeah.
commercially.
And then
Yeah,
he teams up with Pattinson for Cosmopolis and Maps to the Stars. Both kind of like, I feel like, middle of the road review movies. I haven't seen them yet, so I will, when I get to them, I will talk about them. But
yeah, two movies that, yeah, again, you look at Pattinson's in both of these, but you
yeah,
look at the cast and you're just like, okay, these are
dude, Map of the
bangers.
Stars has like a ridiculous cast in it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Amber Waves is in it.
Sorry. Yeah, Amber Waves, Boogie Nights, callback. All right, so we'll get to our review of the week. That is David Cronenberg's movie. We already talked about it a little bit. Crimes of the Future. So, Crimes of the Future is set somewhere in the near future. It's this. It starts off with a murder. This is not really spoiling anything, of this kid who's eating a plastic garbage can. His mother smothers him with a pillow, calls the father, played by Scott Speedman, to come get him. He does, and then the movie starts. We then basically cut to Viggo Mortensen on his little bone skeleton bed thing.
Yeah, yeah. And you're like, which
Chronic
again
pain.
goes, yeah, what I'm saying about you need to have watched other Cronenberg films. Otherwise, immediately it's distracting to like, what the fuck is going on? Because they don't explain it until like a half hour later.
Yeah. Yep. So he's got chronic pain, which is, on a personal level, something I can relate to, something I deal with on a daily basis. So there are elements of this film too, especially rewatching it again, is like, I feel this, like I get this. Like if there was
Yeah.
things that could help me, like this, I'd sit in some fucking weird chair if I had to, like to help me with my body. But um, you know, this movie, especially on second viewing, it's still really fucking interesting, man. Like it's, Andy, why don't you tell us what it's
I'm
about?
so glad. Yeah, I'm so glad you saw it. You saw it again. I'm really looking forward to it. And because I am a collector and because I'm kind of a millennial / Gen X, I did pre-order the Blu-ray. Although I'm sure eventually it'll be in Criterion, so I'll just have to fucking buy it again. But
Yep.
no,
That's why I bought it digitally, so I'll buy it when I buy it hard copy.
nice.
Criterion.
Yeah, I'm just playing it up. But
well, I'm with you though. I do that show all the time.
I think, I mean, I knew that in as has been the case, we mentioned Can a few times here, but 6 times he's been up for the Palme d'Or, if I'm saying that correctly. This is another one that was in that consideration, and I think when I saw that it was, I mean, I'll be honest, when I saw that people were leaving the theater or heard about it and that it was disturbing, I thought, okay, I'm in.
Right?
I'm going to make it a point to go to a theater and see this. Like, we just mentioned neither one of us has seen his last couple, but it felt like Cronenberg returning to Cronenberg. If he's disturbing people in some way, yeah, I'm interested in that. But I just found it to be a revelation in a lot of ways, and like totally, like as I said at the top, like, and I'll get to the specifics of the movie in a second, but kind of calibrates how I see him as a filmmaker, and like putting him in the upper echelon, quite frankly.
Yeah.
And considering what he's done in the last 50 years, and how much he's nailed, like, about whether it's the accurate human experience, or if it's just our anxieties about humanity. And
Mhm.
in this film in particular, yes, you're going to be, the tagline is sex is the is or so sorry, I'm going backwards. Surgery is the new sex.
Yep.
So, there's a sensationalism to that for sure. And you see characters like being aroused by having their partner perform surgery on them. Now, Viggo Mortensen's character in particular is interesting because he has, and this seems to be commonplace in this world,
Yep.
he has new organs coming out of nowhere. People can't figure out why. Once again, connecting to kind of like that body element, that's a constant theme in Cronenberg's work, along with kind of like the evolution of humanity. Now, you
Mhm.
mentioned, I'm going to try to avoid the big spoiler, but the connection to, how the movie begins and how
Yep.
that relates to what is happening in our world with the amount of plastic that we have, in
There
our oceans,
there's yeah.
already in our food, like it's in our waterways.
Yep.
Um, and there's certainly like a theme, some connective tissue. Tissue is really the right word for Cronenberg. With you know with trans people right now, and like discussions on what makes someone, um how they see themselves and how you see them, and where do we put value in that. There's a particularly powerful scene, and I'm gonna screw up her name. Leah
Leah Sado is how I say it.
Leah Sado from the Bond film. She was in a Mission Impossible as well. Leah Sado's character, she gets,
Caprice.
Caprice. Thank you.
Yeah.
She gets, God, what's it called? She gets something put into her, not
Yeah,
a
they're
tattoo.
like kind of horns. People get the horns and
Yeah,
stuff. She gets them
people
on her
do. Yeah,
forehead.
yeah.
So
And she gets
something.
this done because she wants to do it. She thinks it's beautiful. She sees somebody else at
Mhm.
one of these like cult-like events, which recalls in Crash, the things that Vaughn would put together, and you're like, why do they know about this, and where is the rest of society?
And
But
where was Alaska Tears? That's what I want to
yeah, I wish that would have been great if he showed up. Yeah, yeah. But and she sees somebody else, and she finds that person beautiful, and like
know.
how our perception of that, and how we project it onto others.
Oh, of course.
And
Just
and
yeah.
even the opening death is how someone perceives someone else, and that's unnatural, and
Yep.
therefore they can't be in my world. And that's a theme
There's
again and again.
yep.
The and I don't mean to cover too much shit.
Oh,
I'll
it's
pass
okay.
it
I
back to
mean,
you
we're
one
reviewing
second.
it. Let's go.
But like the one thing I wanted to hit on, just like in general, and it's very much the case in this, is the dreamlike state that you feel in this film and most of Cronenberg's films. You can be dreamlike or nightmare, really,
Mhm.
of you just feel like you're gliding through something. It resembles our society or our world, but something's off. Like those in this film, they have these surgeries that everybody seems to know about, but there's like 15 people there, and
Yep.
we haven't mentioned Kristen Stewart, who's like
Yeah.
becomes like a fanboy of
Yep.
Vigo, and
Her and the other guy. Yeah. Her and
yeah,
her
and the other
employee.
actor, and but like there's nobody there, and so it's like, but they got in. It doesn't really make sense, but it plays into that dreamlike state. Touching on Crash for a second, it takes place in Toronto, but there's like an absence of people, and they note that a couple times, right? Like,
Mhm.
where's everybody? And I think about that throughout some of his other films, like Videodrome, like what's real, what's not. And interestingly, I think part of what helps that happen as a viewer is because a lot of these things take place in. This wasn't specific to that, but there's also somebody speaking French, so maybe
Yeah.
these take place in Canada,
Yeah.
for the most part. And Canada's like, I think as an American, we have a very kind of a bit of a superiority complex and think like, well, their culture is probably our culture,
Yeah.
but it's not. It's like a distinctive country. but at the same time, it mirrors a lot of us.
Mm-hmm.
But that factor, and I was doing some little bit of research on Cronenberg. He from Toronto,
Yes.
lives there, went to the University of Toronto. Like, Toronto's, probably the most, cosmopolitan, well, maybe Montreal, but
Mm-hmm.
city in Canada. But again, it helps perpetuate this dreamlike state, given that it's like this almost mirror image, but it's a little different from what we recognize as our society.
Mm-hmm.
But all of that stuff. I mean, you're probably like, when is it my turn? But like, to speak to like the quality of the film, I've talked about this for 15 minutes, and I haven't told you about the plot.
Nope.
And
Nope.
when you can do that for a film,
Yeah.
like, you got a winner and something you're going to want to revisit and rewatch.
Well, I think what's interesting about a movie like this is, we talk about how weird it is and how bizarre, and it just right off the bat. But that's just him. There's a story underneath all this. I've watched a million movies that have all the weird shit in it, but they don't go anywhere. This has you talked about a lot of the themes. Another theme in this movie is government overreach, the government
Yeah.
having to control everything, and there's a lot of that going. And that's a plot line I did not see coming. That was like kind of like, oh shit, like this is this kind of movie. So he took a lot of shit that's going on in society right now and put it all into this movie, and it's not overfilled. It fits. Every element of this film works, and it works on a level that I think if you can get past the weirdness of it, it
Yeah.
works for everybody. You know what I mean? The story is commercial. The movie itself is not. The movie is
Far from
definitely
it. Yeah.
for Cronenberg fans. Like you said, it was all over Twitter and stuff when this movie was coming out. It was like an event. People were like, "Oh my god, I'm going to go see a new Cronenberg movie in the theaters, a new body horror
Yeah.
film." Spider was really like the last horror film that he did too. So it's been almost 20 years since he did a horror film. So, or a sci-fi film, whatever you want, whatever Cronenberg wants to call it.
Yeah.
But it's just that alone makes it an event. But the fact that again, like I said, you have this story that is very relatable to today's society, and that we could talk about. We could talk an hour just based on crimes of the future. We're not going to, because it'd go on forever. But um, it's a movie I think that demands to be seen just because of what it's about. You have to kind of take like you said, with the plastic and stuff, like that may seem weird at first, but there's a reason he used that instead of something else. There's a reason he did the body stuff, because a lot of the body stuff is how we see ourselves. The one girl is that you talked about with the face all effed up. You could tell underneath that she's like physically on the outside, she's very pretty, but she doesn't see herself in that way. And that's like you said, like trans people. That's where he's making that allegory, that statement that
Yeah.
people see themselves differently no matter what. And a lot of it, society has to do with how we see ourselves. And I think this is trying to tackle like the way of like how we should do it as opposed to how we do it. And it just it's so good. Like it's hard. Like you said, we haven't really talked about the plot. I don't even really want to give it away.
You know, these little things too, like all of you mentioned Vigo on the chair that's like this, like, that looks like it's like human flesh, human
Yeah.
bone.
Mm-hmm.
And like there's a series of these products, that are being put out. We're not really certain like how many people have these. We assume it's kind of a rarity, but that it's kind of like normal in society to have those, and that's really fascinating visually. There's these bars that look like Hershey bars. They're definitely not. That like
Yeah.
Scott Speedman's putting out for people like himself, people like his deceased son. That's like really, again, visually like appealing to see them like have this factory where they're making these things. The one thing that like, and we talked about sex and nudity a lot, and like I don't want to undersell that. Sometimes the nudity is gratuitous
Oh, for
in
sure.
these Cronenberg films. Like, I don't want to make it seem like, oh, it's always part of the plot. I
Always
wouldn't want to
art,
sell it like that.
no, it's not. It's not always art in
It's
hit.
not. I mean, in this film too, that you don't need to have some of the nudity that's in it. So just prepare yourself for that if you are gonna lace them up and watch this.
Yeah,
But
I think
yeah,
what it is too is he's foreign to us. He's from Canada, and like you said, it seems like they're the same, but they're not. A lot of
Yeah.
foreign people look at nudity a lot differently than we do. They don't
Yeah.
look at a naked woman as every time she's naked, she's sexy. That's just a part of, when she's lying in
Yeah.
that bed. Like that's kind of what you're alluding to.
Right.
That's very, erotic scene, if you will, of her lying there. But it's not. While
It's
it's
both. It's
right,
both, right? It's
exactly.
both natural because that's people are naked, nude a lot of times, particularly with their partner, their lover, what
Yeah.
have you. But it's also yes, it can be
Or
very
fellow
sexy.
employee
Like
who works on the device with her.
yeah,
That kind of
yeah,
came out of nowhere too. I was like, "Whoa, hey."
yeah, like these pixies.
Yeah, yeah, very, very
That was definitely the oddest part of the film for me because and maybe I need to rewatch it to like figure out how they really fit in. They certainly fulfill a device. I won't spoil it,
they
like
do, yeah.
for the
Mhm.
plot. But I don't know that maybe there was something in the dialogue that I could have picked up on.
Listen to the French guy, the guy that he goes and talks to a few times. There's something
Yeah,
there with them.
I'll,
But, and I'm not gonna mention the scene in total, but, like, it caught me off guard again, the zipper scene. Like
oh yeah,
like, it was
yeah,
one of those scenes where I was, like, watching it again, I'm like, "Yeah, yeah," yeah," I'm like, "Oh, fuck." Like,
yeah.
totally forgot. Um,
Oh
yeah,
man.
so Crimes of the Future, I mean, to me, it's one of the best movies I've seen this year. I would say 10 out of 10 is what I rated it. I did that a lot during my weird week where I watched a lot of weird films. Um, it it just, like, talking about it now, like, it's one of those films that even watching it again, I was like, "Oh, this is still really good," but, like, talking about it with you makes me even love it even more. So it's like, just a film like this that can get you talking, that can be interesting to bring up to people. So what would you rank it, Andy, if you had to put a rating to it?
Yeah, well, to echo your last point, it just enhances the quality of the
Mm,
film. That's kind of was my point when I can talk about something for this long, and
yeah.
you've got your own things that you picked up on, and then we can kind of put it together, and you know, it's a movie you could read a book about, when that's a rarity. I mean, right? And you want to read that book.
Yeah. Yes, definitely.
Man, I'm not on the ten scale. Normally, I'm an old fashioned stars guy.
Yeah,
But I would say this is a 4-star movie to me.
yeah.
And I know that I was on the show, about around the Academy Awards, and we both love and hate the Academy Awards.
Yes.
At the same time, I would like particularly given that Cronenberg's 79, I would love if he got some recognition just through a nomination.
Yeah,
Honestly.
for sure. I
Um,
think it would
for
be well deserved if he
and
did.
he's writer, director, producer on this. So like, pick your category, put him
Right.
up for it.
Well, and it seems like screenplay recently has been the one where they're like, "We're gonna throw him in there, and maybe they'll win."
Yeah, it's gonna be
Like,
a little weird.
yeah, like
Yeah, we'll
Taika.
see how weird those can
Taika won, so, I mean, there's a lot
go.
of
Yeah.
the like, this I feel like the screenplay awards can go to weirdos. So I'm
Do you
okay
think?
with that.
Did you? Was there an acting performance in particular? I mean, I think we agreed that it was across the board very good. But would you put one above the other if you were to say, "Hey,
You know,
I'd love to see
the
that
last
person get it"?
the
Yeah, go
last
ahead.
scene, that Leah has, not the last one with Vigo, but the one she has at the final, climactic point of the film. I don't wanna spoil anything.
Yeah,
Where she's crying, like, I would say she probably deserves it more than Vigo, because Vigo's great. He's great in this movie, but he does a lot of the heavy lifting, so he's leading us through this film where the other actors get to have a lot of fun.
a lot
And
of coughing too.
huh?
A lot of coughing and
A lot of
clearing his
coughing
throat.
from Vigo, yes. Like Kristen Stewart would be I would be okay like a best supporting actor, and she's not in it a whole lot, but what she did in this
Yeah,
movie was very different than what she's done in any of her other movies. And so I think it was a very interesting performance. But if I was going to nominate anyone, if I had to pick one person, it would be Leah. I think
I
she gave
I,
a
I
great performance. Um,
I think you nailed it. There's a lot of nuance to her performance, both in because she's paired with Vigo, who's both kind of like who's kind of the star of the show
yep,
in a sense. But when I say the show, I don't mean the movie, although he's kind of like top billed. Although Kristen Stewart might have better name recognition.
at this
But
point, probably
within the art, yeah, within the art world within the movie,
yeah. Hmm.
he's looked at kind of as the artist by most people, even though she's the one doing the surgery. But she's got a really interesting arc in it. especially given that these things are not happening to her. Like she's not growing these extra parts. She's not the one suffering in the chair. They can't eat. He can't eat. His posture is all messed up. I think that'd be great. I also and I know you and I are very aware of it, but I hope that, and I guess Spencer has helped out a lot, but for people to take Kristen Stewart seriously.
Yes.
I mean, the Twilight thing has had such a hangover, and like, caricatures of her as kind of like mumbling and touching her hair and whatnot. But I would love if this can kind of put her in a different light for people.
Hey, mine and Wayne's 7 listeners know that I love Kristen Stewart, so I think they probably know how big of a star she is in my eyes. I've touted her a lot. We did when we were doing like what to watch segment before early on. I did a whole Kristen Stewart thing and stuff. So I've been on hers for a while. The Twilight thing was fucking like a long fucking time ago. It was a long time ago. There's no
right
7. So it's like, get over it, everybody. Her and Pattinson have gone on to do a lot of great work, and I think she's got another one from the director of Saint Maud coming out, which is going to be fucking trippy too. I'm excited to see where she goes, and it was great when I found out she was in this movie. I was like, yes, like this is what I want to see her and stuff like this. But we are going long here, people, so I think we're gonna get to the wrapping up the show. I'm gonna skip the news and notes, but I do have some recommendations for other body horror type films, Andy.
Right.
Possessor, if you haven't seen that's Brandon Cronenberg, David Cronenberg's son. It's now, I believe it's on Hulu, so definitely check that out. American Mary from the Saska sisters. I really recommend that one. Very Cronenberg-esque because it's a lot of surgery stuff, and I'm forgetting Catherine Isabelle is the main character, and she's really fucking good in that movie. Slither, Titane, which I talked about. I only recommend Titane is watch Titane. I don't know that you'll like Titane, but watch Titane.
Yeah, I have it waiting for me right now. I actually got it at the library.
Nice. Thing, Reanimator, those got a lot of body horror stuff in it. Let me see if there's anything else that I really wanted. Hellraiser. I mean, Hellraiser is like, the kind of king of popular body horror. Lots of chains, whips, and stuff pulling in. It's a great fucking movie. Hellraiser is amazing. So definitely check that out if you haven't seen it. But yeah, there's lots of good stuff out there. If you just Google body horror, a lot of shit's going to come up. So, they're going to bring up, of course, they bring up like Alien and stuff that has a scene with the guy chest popping out, stuff like that. So,
yeah.
But yeah, so Andy, thank you for coming on the show and talking this about Cronenberg, man. It was something that I know we talked about recently doing this, and just so happened Wayne was out of town and busy with family and stuff, so we got to do this now, and I had a great time talking about him.
Absolutely, and I have a compatriot now. I know, and just in being enamored with all things Cronenberg, and being a sicko. So if you're a sicko too, let us know in the comments.
Send us a message.
Some good recs. We'll give you some good recommendations.
Yeah. If you got recommendations, send them our way, because there's some stuff that we haven't seen yet either. Also, Autopsy of Jane Doe. If no one's seen that, check that one out. Really good.
Okay.
All right, everybody. That's been another episode of Now Showing with Mike and Wayne. We appreciate you listening. Have a great day. Bye.
Reagan, the actor.
Hasta la vista, baby.
Hey, everybody, we're all gonna get laid.